Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when no cameras are rolling, when no speeches are prepared, and when the world isn't watching. On a cold Tuesday morning in March 2024, two of the most photographed people on Earth made a choice that would ripple across continents, touch millions of hearts, and remind us all that true royalty isn't about crowns or titles. It's about the courage to be human when the world expects you to be perfect. What began as a simple phone call would soon become a story that grandmothers would tell their grandchildren, that would be shared in hospital corridors and school playgrounds, and that would prove that sometimes the quietest acts create the loudest echoes. This is the story of how Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped away from the glittering world of royal protocol to do something so unexpectedly genuine that it left a global audience not just watching, but truly seeing them for the first time. In a world where royal news typically revolves around grand ceremonies, state visits, and carefully choreographed public appearances, what happened next was so refreshingly real, so beautifully unscripted, that it reminded everyone watching that beneath the titles and traditions live two people who understand that the greatest privilege isn't wearing a crown. It's the ability to lift others up when they need it most. The morning started like any other at Adelaide Cottage, the modest four-bedroom home that William and Catherine had chosen over the grandeur of Windsor Castle. Catherine was in the kitchen, making breakfast for their three children, while William reviewed his schedule for the day. The smell of toast filled the air, and the sounds of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis getting ready for school created the familiar chaos that any parent would recognize. But this wasn't just any morning. For weeks, Catherine had been carrying a weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. The medical appointments, the worried glances from William, the careful way their staff spoke around her. Everything pointed to something that she wasn't quite ready to share with the world. The diagnosis had come on a gray February afternoon, delivered by a doctor whose kind eyes couldn't soften the impact of the words. Cancer. The word hung in the air like a shadow that refused to leave. William had been by her side when they received the news, his hand finding hers instinctively, his usual composed demeanor cracking just enough to reveal the man behind the title. They had sat in silence for what felt like hours, processing not just what this meant for Catherine, but what it meant for their family, their children, and the millions of people who looked up to them. The doctor had been optimistic about the treatment options, but, in that moment, optimism felt like a distant concept. The decision about when and how to share this news with the public had been agonizing. Palace advisors suggested careful timing, media strategies, and prepared statements. But, as Catherine watched her children laugh over breakfast, she realized that all the royal protocol in the world couldn't prepare her for this moment. This wasn't about being a princess. This was about being a mother, a wife, and a woman facing the most challenging chapter of her life. William had been her anchor throughout the process. The man who had once been criticized for being too reserved, too controlled, had revealed depths of tenderness that surprised even those closest to him. He had researched treatment options late into the night, had held Catherine when the weight of everything became too much, and had somehow managed to maintain normalcy for their children while his own world felt like it was shifting beneath his feet. The morning phone call that would change everything came from an unexpected source. Sarah Mitchell, a nurse at a children's hospital in Manchester, had been following Catherine's recent absence from public duties. As a mother herself, Sarah had noticed the subtle signs, the way Catherine had looked tired during her last public appearance, the careful way the palace had worded their statements about her health. Working in pediatric oncology, Sarah had developed an intuition about these things. Sarah's own daughter, Emma, had been battling leukemia for 8 months. At 7 years old, Emma had shown remarkable strength throughout her treatment, but, lately, she had been asking difficult questions. Why did some people get better while others didn't? Why did her hair have to fall out? And, most heartbreaking of all, she had started to believe that being sick made her less special, less worthy of attention and love. The idea came to Sarah during a particularly difficult night shift. Emma had been having nightmares about her treatment, and Sarah had been holding her daughter's hand when Emma whispered, "Mummy, do you think Princess Catherine would still like me even though I'm sick?" The question broke Sarah's heart, but it also sparked something inside her. She realized that her daughter, like so many other children fighting similar battles, needed to see that being vulnerable didn't make you weak. It could actually make you stronger. Sarah spent days crafting the perfect letter. She wrote about Emma's journey, about the other children in the ward who drew pictures of princesses with scarves covering their bald heads, about how these brave little souls needed to see that even real princesses face challenges. She wasn't asking for a miracle. She was asking for hope. She was asking for someone who understood that sometimes the most royal thing you can do is admit that you're scared. The letter found its way through the usual palace channels, but something about Sarah's words resonated with the private secretaries who typically filtered such requests. Perhaps it was the sincerity of a mother's plea, or perhaps it was the timing, arriving just as Catherine was struggling with her own questions about vulnerability and strength. Whatever the reason, the letter didn't get filed away with the thousands of other requests. Instead, it made its way to Catherine's personal assistant, who recognized immediately that this was something the princess would want to see herself. Catherine read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of meaning. She saw herself in Sarah's description of a mother trying to find the right words to comfort her child. She saw her own children in Emma's questions about fairness and fear. And, most importantly, she saw an opportunity to turn her own struggle into something that could help others. When Catherine showed the letter to William, his response was immediate and wholehearted. This wasn't about public relations or royal duties. This was about human connection at its most fundamental level. They began planning something that had never been done before in royal history, a completely private, unannounced visit to a children's hospital, with no media, no official photographers, and no advance notice to anyone except the hospital's most trusted staff. The logistics were complex. How do you arrange a royal visit without the usual security protocols and media circus? How do you ensure genuine interaction when the very presence of royalty can overwhelm? William and Catherine worked with their security team to develop a plan that prioritized authenticity over protocol. They would arrive quietly, spend real time with the children, and leave without fanfare. But, as they planned this visit, something unexpected began to happen. Word of Catherine's own diagnosis had started to leak, not through official channels, but through the whispered conversations that happened in the corridors of power. Rumors swirled, speculation grew, and pressure mounted for an official announcement. The palace press office fielded increasingly aggressive questions from media outlets sensing a story. Catherine found herself at a crossroads. She could maintain the traditional royal approach, carefully managed statements, controlled narratives, and measured revelation of personal information. Or she could do something that felt more authentic to who she was as a person, not just as a princess. She could share her story in a way that might help others feel less alone in their own struggles. The evening before their planned hospital visit, Catherine and William sat in their garden as the children played nearby. The spring air carried the scent of the daffodils Catherine had planted years earlier, a reminder that even in the darkest seasons, life finds a way to push through. They talked about legacy, about what kind of royalty they wanted to represent, and about the difference between being admired and being truly helpful. What if we could show people that being scared doesn't make you weak? Catherine asked, watching Charlotte help Louis build a fort out of garden chairs. What if we could prove that admitting you need help is actually the bravest thing you can do? William nodded, understanding immediately what she was suggesting. They weren't just planning a hospital visit anymore. They were planning to rewrite the rules about royal vulnerability, to show that true strength comes not from appearing perfect, but from being willing to be real when others need to see that it's okay to not be okay. As the sun set over their quiet corner of Windsor, Catherine made a decision that would echo far beyond the walls of Adelaide Cottage. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just visit children who were fighting cancer. She would meet them as someone who understood their fear, their uncertainty, and their incredible courage. She would meet them not as a princess, but as a fellow traveler on a journey that no one chooses but many must walk. The plans for the hospital visit took on new meaning. This wouldn't just be about comforting others. It would be about finding strength in shared vulnerability, about discovering that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer someone is the knowledge that they're not alone. Catherine fell asleep that night with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks, ready to face whatever came next with the kind of courage that can only be found when you stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be real. The drive to Manchester Children's Hospital felt different from any royal journey Catherine had ever taken. Usually, these trips were preceded by weeks of planning, detailed briefings, and carefully choreographed schedules. Today, she sat in the passenger seat of William's car, dressed simply in jeans and a comfortable sweater, her hair covered by a soft scarf that served both practical and symbolic purposes. No police escort, no official vehicles, no advanced security sweep, just 2 people making their way to meet others who needed to know they weren't alone. William gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, his knuckles white against the leather. He had been the strong one throughout Catherine's diagnosis, the rock that everyone leaned on. But today he was allowing himself to feel the full weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about supporting others. It was about Catherine stepping into the most vulnerable chapter of her life with the kind of grace that would either inspire or overwhelm everyone they met. The hospital came into view just as the morning rush was beginning to settle. Manchester's skyline stretched beyond the medical complex, a city full of people starting their day with the usual concerns of work, family, and everyday life. Catherine wondered how many of them were carrying hidden struggles, how many were fighting battles that others couldn't see. Today, she would be one of them, not the polished princess the world expected, but a woman facing uncertainty with hope and fear in equal measure. Dr. Patricia Wong, the hospital's chief of pediatric oncology, met them at a side entrance that the public rarely saw. She had been briefed about the unusual nature of this visit, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of greeting two of the world's most recognizable people as if they were any other concerned visitors. Catherine's handshake was firm but warm, her eyes already scanning the corridors with the kind of attention that suggested she was here to truly see, not just to be seen. "Thank you for allowing us to come," Catherine said, her voice carrying none of the formal tone usually reserved for official engagements. "We know this is highly irregular, but sometimes irregular is exactly what's needed." Dr. Wong led them through corridors painted in cheerful colors, past rooms where the business of healing children continued with the kind of determined optimism that pediatric hospitals somehow manage to maintain. Nurses smiled and nodded as they passed, some doing double takes before quickly returning to their work. The staff had been briefed to treat this like any other day, to let the visit unfold naturally rather than turning it into a spectacle. The pediatric oncology ward occupied an entire floor, its windows overlooking a garden where children could play during their treatment. Catherine paused at one of these windows, watching a young boy push his four-pole like a partner in some elaborate dance. His mother sat nearby, her attention divided between a book she wasn't really reading and the constant vigilance that parents of sick children know so well. "That's Marcus," Dr. Wong explained quietly. "He's 8. Been here for 3 months. His mother, Janet, hasn't left his side except to go home and shower." Catherine nodded, recognizing something universal in Janet's posture. The way worry becomes a physical presence that settles into your shoulders and refuses to leave. Their first stop was the common room, where several children were engaged in art therapy. The room buzzed with the kind of determined cheerfulness that children bring to difficult situations, their voices mixing with the sound of crayons on paper and the quiet hum of medical equipment that had become background noise in their daily lives. Sarah Mitchell was there with Emma, who was carefully coloring a picture of a castle with a princess who looked remarkably like the photographs she had seen of Catherine. Emma looked up as they entered, her eyes widening with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. Her hair had grown back in soft patches since starting treatment, giving her an almost ethereal appearance that somehow made her seem older and younger than her 7 years. She was wearing a pink hospital gown decorated with unicorns, and her small hands were steady as she continued coloring, though Catherine could see the slight tremor that sometimes comes with certain medications. "Emma," Sarah said softly, "I'd like you to meet some special visitors." Catherine knelt down to Emma's eye level, a gesture that came naturally after years of interacting with her own children. But this felt different, more intentional, more meaningful. She wasn't performing the role of a caring princess. She was simply being present with a child who needed to know that someone understood what it felt like to be scared. "That's a beautiful castle," Catherine said, genuinely admiring Emma's artwork. "I especially love the princess. She looks very brave." Emma studied Catherine's face with the kind of directness that only children possess. "Are you really Princess Catherine?" she asked, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and something that sounded like recognition. "I am," Catherine replied, settling more comfortably on the floor beside Emma's chair. "But right now, I'm just Catherine. And I've been hoping to meet you because your mummy wrote me the most wonderful letter about how brave you are." The conversation that followed would later be described by those who witnessed it as one of the most genuine interactions they had ever seen between a member of the royal family and a member of the public. Catherine didn't just listen to Emma's questions about treatment and recovery. She shared her own fears and hopes in language that a 7-year-old could understand. "Sometimes," Catherine said, watching Emma add details to her princess drawing, "being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the things you need to do even when you are scared. Your mummy told me that you've been incredibly brave, and I wanted to tell you that I think being scared sometimes just means you're smart enough to know that some things are really important. Emma nodded solemnly, then looked up at Catherine with sudden curiosity. Do you get scared sometimes too? The question hung in the air for a moment. William, who had been talking quietly with other children nearby, paused in his conversation. Sarah held her breath, recognizing that this was the moment she had hoped for when she wrote her letter. The moment when vulnerability might create connection. Yes, Catherine said simply. I get scared sometimes too, especially when I don't know what's going to happen next, or when I'm worried about the people I love. Emma considered this for a moment, then reached into her art box and pulled out a new piece of paper. Would you like to draw with me? She asked. Sometimes when I'm scared, drawing helps me feel better. For the next hour, Catherine and Emma drew together. Their pictures started as separate creations but gradually merged into a collaborative scene of a garden where princesses and regular children played together, where flowers grew despite difficult weather, and where being different was just another way of being special. Other children gradually joined them, drawn by the unusual sight of an adult who seemed genuinely interested in their world rather than just visiting it. William moved through the room with his own natural ease, engaging with parents who needed to talk to someone who understood that love sometimes means watching helplessly while someone you care about faces things you can't fix for them. He listened to fathers who had taken leave from work to be present, to mothers who were learning to navigate medical terminology they never wanted to know, and to siblings who were trying to understand why family life had suddenly become so serious. Dr. Wong watched the interactions with professional interest and personal amazement. In 20 years of pediatric medicine, she had seen many well-meaning visitors come through these doors. Politicians making carefully timed appearances, celebrities fulfilling charitable obligations, and countless others whose hearts were in the right place, but whose presence sometimes felt more like an intrusion than a comfort. This was different. This felt like genuine human connection happening in real time. The breakthrough moment came when Emma looked up from their collaborative artwork and asked Catherine the question that had been building throughout their time together. When you're scared about being sick, what makes you feel better? Catherine paused, considering not just what answer would be helpful, but what answer would be true. Talking to people who understand helps, she said finally. And remembering that being sick doesn't change who you are inside. You're still Emma, still smart, still creative, still capable of making other people smile. Sometimes our bodies need extra help, but that doesn't make us any less special. Emma smiled, a genuine expression of understanding that seemed to light up the entire room. Will you come back and draw with me again? She asked. I would love that, Catherine replied, and everyone who heard her knew she meant it. As they prepared to leave the common room and visit other parts of the ward, Catherine realized something had shifted inside her. She had come here hoping to offer comfort to children facing medical challenges, but she was leaving with something equally valuable. The recognition that vulnerability shared becomes strength multiplied, that admitting fear doesn't diminish courage but actually amplifies it. The next part of their visit would take them to the rooms of children too sick to join group activities, where the conversations would be quieter but no less meaningful. Catherine felt ready for whatever came next, grounded in the knowledge that being real with others was not just helpful to them. It was healing for her too. William caught her eye as they walked down the corridor, his expression mixing pride with something deeper. They were discovering together that the most powerful royal prerogative might be the ability to show others that even princesses face challenges, even future kings sometimes feel overwhelmed, and that the greatest service they could offer was the gift of shared humanity in moments when people needed to feel less alone. The private rooms on the ward told different stories of courage, each one a testament to the individual battles being fought behind closed doors. Catherine and William moved through these spaces with increasing awareness that they weren't just visiting patients. They were witnessing the full spectrum of human resilience in its most raw and beautiful form. Each room held a family navigating uncharted territory, learning new definitions of strength, and discovering reserves of love they never knew existed. Their next stop was the room of 12-year-old James Patterson, who had been battling brain cancer for over a year. James was known throughout the ward for his infectious humor, his ability to make the nursing staff laugh even on their most difficult days, and his encyclopedic knowledge of everything related to space exploration. When Catherine and William entered his room, they found him propped up in bed with his laptop open, working on what appeared to be a detailed presentation about Mars colonization. Are you planning a trip? William asked, settling into the chair beside James's bed with the easy manner of someone who had learned that humor often opens doors that formality cannot. James grinned, his enthusiasm temporarily overwhelming the fatigue that was clearly part of his daily reality. Actually, yes, he said with the kind of serious determination that only 12-year-olds can muster. I figure by the time I'm old enough, they'll have worked out all the technical problems. Plus, if I can handle chemo, I can probably handle space travel. The casual way James referenced his treatment struck Catherine as both heartbreaking and inspiring. Here was a child who had integrated the most challenging experience imaginable into his worldview without letting it define his limits. She found herself drawn into his presentation, asking questions about atmospheric pressure and gravitational differences with genuine curiosity, while William discussed the practical challenges of long-distance space communication. James's mother, Rebecca, sat in the corner of the room working on a laptop of her own. She explained that she had started a blog to document their journey, initially as a way to keep family and friends updated, but increasingly as a resource for other parents facing similar situations. Her posts had gained a following among families dealing with pediatric cancer, creating a community of support that stretched far beyond the hospital walls. The hardest part isn't the medical stuff, Rebecca explained as James continued his enthusiastic discussion of Mars rover technology. The doctors and nurses know what they're doing, and James has been amazing throughout treatment. The hardest part is feeling like the rest of the world has moved on with normal life while you're suspended in this parallel universe where nothing works the way it used to. Catherine nodded, recognizing the feeling of displacement that comes with any serious health challenge. How do you find your way back to feeling connected to the world outside? She asked, genuinely seeking guidance as much as offering support. Honestly, Rebecca replied, I'm still figuring that out. Some days I feel like I'm getting the hang of it, and other days I feel completely lost. But James keeps me grounded. His attitude reminds me that this experience doesn't have to steal our joy. It can actually teach us to appreciate things we used to take for granted. As if to illustrate his mother's point, James looked up from his laptop with sudden concern. Wait, are you both okay? You seem kind of worried about something. The perceptiveness of children facing serious illness had struck Catherine repeatedly throughout the day. There seemed to be a heightened emotional intelligence that developed when young people were forced to confront mortality and uncertainty. James had picked up on something that adults might have missed, the underlying tension that came with Catherine and William's own unspoken worries. William and Catherine exchanged glances, recognizing an opportunity for the kind of honest conversation they had hoped this visit might enable. Catherine took a breath, choosing her words carefully, but speaking from the heart. You're very perceptive, James, she said. Actually, I've been dealing with some health challenges of my own lately. Nothing as serious as what you're going through, but enough to make me understand a little bit about how scary it can be when your body isn't working the way you expect it to. James studied her face with the kind of direct attention he had been giving to his Mars research. Is that why you came here today? To talk to kids who get it? The simplicity and accuracy of his question took Catherine by surprise. Partly, yes, she admitted. Sometimes it helps to talk to people who understand that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Exactly, James said, his enthusiasm returning. Like, everyone keeps telling me how brave I am, but I'm not really brave. I just don't have a choice about the treatment, so I try to make it as interesting as possible. The real brave people are the ones who choose to get up every day and help other people feel better. He gestured toward his mother, then toward the hallway where they could hear the voices of nursing staff. They all have choices about how to spend their time, and they choose to be here with kids like me. That seems much braver than just getting through something you can't avoid anyway. Rebecca wiped away tears that had formed as her son spoke. It was clear that James's perspective had been shaped by months of observation and reflection, and his wisdom seemed to transcend his years in ways that were both beautiful and bittersweet. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Wong, who knocked gently before entering to check on James's afternoon medications. As she prepared his treatment, she mentioned that several other children on the ward had heard about the visit and were hoping for a chance to meet their unexpected guests. Word had spread through the informal but efficient communication network that exists in any tight-knit community, and excitement was building throughout the floor. Would you like to meet them? Dr. Wong asked. Some are in the game room, and others are in the therapy garden. Nothing formal, just a chance to say hello if you have time. Catherine and William readily agreed. But first they wanted to finish their conversation with James. He had returned to his Mars presentation and was explaining his theory that the problem-solving skills developed during cancer treatment would actually make him a better space explorer. Think about it, he said, his laptop screen showing a detailed diagram of a Mars habitat. Space colonists will need to be good at adapting to unexpected problems, staying calm under pressure, and working with limited resources. Cancer patients do all of that every day. Plus, we're used to having teams of specialists monitoring our health, which is exactly what you'd need in space. William was genuinely impressed by the sophistication of James's reasoning. Have you shared this theory with anyone at NASA or the European Space Agency? He asked. James's eyes lit up with possibility. Do you think they'd actually listen to a kid? I think they'd be very interested in hearing from someone with your unique perspective, William replied. Sometimes the best innovations come from people who approach problems from completely different angles. As they prepared to leave James's room, Catherine found herself thinking about the boy's casual confidence in his future, his assumption that current challenges were simply preparation for future adventures. There was something profoundly hopeful about his worldview that seemed to transform difficulty into opportunity without minimizing the reality of either. Their next stop was the Therapy Garden, an outdoor space designed to provide patients and families with a connection to nature during long hospital stays. The garden featured raised beds where children could help grow vegetables and flowers, comfortable seating areas where families could have private conversations, and a small fountain that provided the kind of peaceful background sound that made difficult conversations feel slightly easier. They found several children engaged in various activities throughout the garden. 10-year-old Sophia was tending to a patch of sunflowers that she had planted at the beginning of her treatment, measuring their growth with the same attention to detail that she applied to tracking her own recovery milestones. Her grandfather, who had immigrated from Spain decades earlier, was helping her practice Spanish while they worked with the soil, creating a conversation that mixed gardening advice with family history. Nearby, 8-year-old Marcus, the boy they had seen from the window earlier, was playing chess with his father, David, who had taken extended leave from his job as an engineer to be present during his son's treatment. The chess set was made of large wooden pieces that were easier for Marcus to manage given the nerve damage that had affected his fine motor skills. Father and son played with intense concentration, occasionally breaking into laughter when one of them made a particularly bold or ridiculous move. Catherine joined Sophia and her grandfather at the sunflower patch, learning about the varieties they had chosen and the progress each plant had made. Sophia explained that she liked sunflowers because they always turned toward the light, even when everything around them was difficult. Her grandfather added that in his village in Spain, people believed that sunflowers brought good luck to anyone who tended them with care and patience. How tall do you think they'll grow? Catherine asked, genuinely curious about Sophia's gardening project. The package says they could reach 6 feet, Sophia replied. But I think ours might grow even taller because we talk to them every day. My grandfather says plants grow better when they know someone cares about them. The simple wisdom of this statement struck Catherine as applicable far beyond gardening. She thought about her own growth through difficult circumstances, about the difference between surviving challenges and thriving through them, and about the importance of having people who believe in your potential even when you can't see it yourself. William had gravitated toward the chess game, where he discovered that Marcus was not only a formidable player but also a natural teacher who enjoyed explaining strategy to anyone interested in learning. David shared that chess had become their daily ritual, a way to maintain normalcy while also giving Marcus something to focus on besides treatment schedules and medical procedures. The thing about chess, Marcus explained as he considered his next move, is that you have to think ahead, but you also have to adapt when unexpected things happen. Kind of like being in the hospital. You can make plans, but you also have to be flexible when things change. As the afternoon progressed, more children and families joined them in the garden. What had started as individual conversations gradually became a larger gathering, united not by formal planning, but by the natural magnetism that occurs when people feel genuinely seen and heard. Stories were shared, laughter echoed across the space, and, for a brief time, the garden felt less like part of a hospital and more like a community celebration of resilience and connection. Catherine realized that something unexpected was happening. She had come here hoping to offer comfort and support to others, but she was discovering that receiving the genuine care and wisdom of these remarkable children and families was equally transformative. Their perspectives on courage, adaptation, and Hope were shifting her own understanding of what it meant to face uncertainty with grace as the sun began to set over the therapy garden, casting a warm glow across the space where so many meaningful conversations had taken place. Catherine found herself reluctant to leave. What had started as a planned visit was evolving into something more significant, a genuine exchange of wisdom, hope, and human connection that none of them had fully anticipated. The children and families gathered here weren't just recipients of royal attention. They were teachers, philosophers, and examples of grace under pressure that would stay with Catherine and William long after they left Manchester. Dr. Wong approached the group with news that would add another layer of meaning to the day. 3 journalists from local and national media outlets had somehow learned about the visit and were requesting interviews. In the normal course of royal engagements, this would have been expected, even welcomed. Media coverage was typically part of the purpose, to shine light on important causes and institutions. But today felt different. Today felt too precious, too genuine to be reduced to sound bites and photo opportunities. Catherine and William huddled with Dr. Wong and several of the parents to discuss how to handle the situation. The last thing anyone wanted was to turn the children's safe space into a media circus, but there was also recognition that the story of this day might have value beyond the hospital walls. If handled thoughtfully, it could help other families facing similar challenges feel less alone, could highlight the incredible work being done at children's hospitals everywhere, and could demonstrate that vulnerability and strength are not opposites, but partners. It was James, the aspiring space explorer, who suggested a solution that surprised everyone with its sophistication. What if, he proposed from his wheelchair where he had joined them in the garden, instead of doing regular interviews, you just told people about us the way we really are? Not like we're sad or inspiring or whatever, but just like we're kids who happen to be dealing with some pretty intense stuff while still being normal kids. Sophia, still holding the watering can she had been using for her sunflowers, nodded enthusiastically. And maybe people could hear about how the doctors and nurses here are basically superheroes who also happen to be really good at making terrible jokes. Marcus, never one to be left out of strategic planning, added his own perspective. The thing is, most people probably think being in the hospital is the worst thing that could happen to a kid. And it's definitely not fun, but it's also not just sad. There's a lot of other stuff too, like learning things you never knew you could learn, and meeting people you never would have met, and finding out you're stronger than you thought. The wisdom of these children continued to amaze the adults listening. They had developed nuanced understandings of their experiences that many grown-ups might struggle to articulate. Their suggestion essentially amounted to authentic storytelling rather than traditional media coverage, sharing real experiences rather than crafting messaging. Catherine made a decision that would later be recognized as a pivotal moment in how the royal family communicated with the public. Instead of formal interviews or prepared statements, she would write a personal letter that could be shared with the media, a letter that told the story of this day honestly, that honored the children and families she had met, and that spoke openly about her own journey in a way that might help others feel less alone in their struggles. But first, there was one more conversation that needed to happen. Emma, the 7-year-old whose mother's letter had initiated this entire day, had been quietly observing from her spot near the fountain. She had been drawing throughout the afternoon, creating what appeared to be a detailed map of the garden with careful notations about who had been sitting where and what each person had shared. Catherine approached Emma with the gentle attention she had maintained throughout the day. "That's a beautiful map you're making," she said, settling beside the little girl on the bench. "It looks like you've been paying attention to everything." Emma nodded seriously. "I wanted to remember it all," she explained. "Sometimes when really good things happen, I worry I might forget the details. So I draw them down so I can always remember exactly how they felt." The thoughtfulness of this explanation touched Catherine deeply. Here was a child who had learned to treasure meaningful moments with the kind of intentionality that many adults never develop. Emma's drawing wasn't just art. It was a form of emotional archaeology, preserving the feelings and connections that mattered most. "Would you tell me about some of the details you want to remember?" Catherine asked. Emma consulted her map carefully, pointing to different areas as she spoke. "Well, over here is where James was explaining about Mars. And you could tell that William was really listening, not just pretending. And here is where Sophia's grandfather was teaching us Spanish words for different flowers. And you learned them too. And this spot is where Marcus beat his dad at chess, and everyone cheered." As Emma continued her tour of the drawn garden, Catherine realized the child was documenting something profound, the moments when people truly saw each other, when genuine connection happened despite differences in age, background, or circumstance. Emma's map was actually a guide to authentic human interaction, created by someone who understood intuitively what many adults spend years trying to learn. "There's one more thing I want to add," Emma said, turning to a blank corner of her paper. She began drawing two figures sitting by the fountain, one slightly taller than the other, both wearing scarves. "This is you and me, right now, talking about remembering things. I want to remember that you asked me about my map, and that you really wanted to know what I thought was important." The simplicity and depth of Emma's observation struck Catherine as capturing something essential about the entire day. The most meaningful moments hadn't been the planned interactions or the formal conversations. They had been the instances when people genuinely wanted to understand each other's perspectives, when curiosity replaced assumption, and when vulnerability created space for real connection. William joined them as Emma was putting finishing touches on her map. He had been engaged in an intense conversation with David, Marcus's father, about the challenges of maintaining career and family balance when unexpected health issues reshape all previous priorities. David had shared insights about learning to be present in uncertainty, about finding meaning in small daily victories, and about the unexpected gifts that sometimes emerge from life's most difficult chapters. "Emma's been showing me her map of the day," Catherine explained to William. "She's captured details that I think the rest of us might have missed." Emma looked up at William with the same direct attention she had given Catherine. "Do you want to see the part where you were listening to James talk about space? You looked really interested, not just polite interested, but actually interested." James could tell the difference. William smiled, recognizing the accuracy of Emma's observation. "James has amazing ideas," he replied. "I was genuinely interested because he's thought about things in ways I never would have considered. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who see possibilities that others miss." As the afternoon light continued to fade, families began the gradual process of returning to their rooms for evening medications, dinner, and the various routines that structure life in a long-term care setting. But there was a reluctance to end what had become an extraordinary day, a sense that something significant had been shared that deserved to be honored rather than simply concluded. Dr. Wong suggested that they gather in the main common room for a brief closing circle, not a formal ceremony, but a chance for anyone who wanted to share reflections on the day to do so. The suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement from children and adults alike, and soon the group had reconvened in the comfortable space where the day's interactions had begun. The sharing that followed was unlike anything Catherine and William had experienced in years of royal engagements. Instead of polite thank yous and carefully worded expressions of gratitude, they heard honest reflections on connection, courage, and the unexpected ways that difficult experiences can become sources of strength and wisdom. Sophia talked about how meeting people who understood that being sick doesn't make you less capable had made her feel more confident about returning to school. Marcus shared his realization that the patience and strategic thinking he had developed during treatment might actually help him in other areas of life. James spoke about his excitement to contact space agencies with his theories about how medical experience could inform space exploration. But it was Emma who captured the essence of the day with the kind of clarity that only children seem to possess. "I think," she said, holding her completed map carefully in both hands, "the most important thing about today was that nobody pretended anything was different than it really was. Everyone just talked about real stuff, and that made everything feel more possible." Her words settled over the room with the weight of profound truth. In a world where interactions between public figures and private citizens are often carefully managed to avoid genuine emotion or controversial topics, this day had been marked by remarkable authenticity. People had shared real fears, real hopes, and real insights without the protective barriers that usually accompany such encounters. Catherine knew that she would never forget this feeling, the lightness that comes from being genuinely seen and accepted, the strength that emerges from shared vulnerability, and the hope that grows when isolation gives way to connection. She also knew that the letter she would write about this day would need to capture not just the facts of what had happened, but the spirit of what had been shared. As families said their goodbyes and began to disperse, Catherine and William remained for a few minutes in the now quiet common room. They sat together processing what they had experienced, understanding that this day had changed them in ways they were still discovering. Tomorrow, they would return to the broader world with its expectations, protocols, and carefully managed public appearances. but they would carry with them the voices and wisdom of the remarkable people they had met, and the knowledge that their own challenges were part of a much larger human story of resilience and hope. The drive back to Windsor was quiet, filled with the kind of reflective silence that follows deeply meaningful experiences. Catherine watched the English countryside pass by the window, her mind still processing the conversations, connections, and insights that had filled the day. William drove with careful attention, occasionally glancing at his wife with a mixture of admiration and concern, recognizing that today had been transformative for both of them in ways they were still beginning to understand. By the time they reached Adelaide Cottage, evening had settled over their small corner of the royal estate. The familiar sight of their children's toys scattered across the front garden, the warm glow of lights in the kitchen windows, and the normal sounds of family life provided a gentle transition back to their personal world. But something had shifted during the day, a new understanding of what it meant to face challenges with grace, and a clearer sense of how their public roles could serve purposes beyond tradition and protocol. The children were waiting for them with the kind of eager curiosity that had become familiar whenever their parents returned from engagements. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had been told that their parents were visiting a hospital to meet some brave children, but they sensed that today had been different from the usual royal duties they had observed throughout their young lives. Over dinner, Catherine and William shared age-appropriate stories from their day, describing the children they had met without violating privacy or overwhelming their own kids with difficult medical details. They talked about James and his plans to explore Mars, about Sophia's sunflower garden and her grandfather's wisdom, about Marcus's chess strategies, and Emma's detailed map of meaningful moments. Were they sad? Charlotte asked with the straightforward concern that 8-year-olds bring to questions about suffering. Catherine considered her answer carefully. Sometimes, she replied honestly. Being sick can be scary and frustrating and definitely not fun. But what was amazing was how they had figured out ways to find joy and meaning and connection even when things were really difficult. They taught us that being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you keep being kind and curious and hopeful even when you are scared. George, 11 years old and beginning to understand more about the complexities of life, asked a more sophisticated question. Why did you decide to visit them without all the usual camera people and security? William and Catherine exchanged glances, recognizing an opportunity to share something important with their children about authenticity and service. Because sometimes, William explained, the most helpful thing you can offer someone is genuine attention rather than publicity. These families needed to feel truly heard and seen, not photographed or interviewed. We learned as much from them as we hopefully gave to them. Louis, the youngest at 6, had been listening with the intense focus he brought to stories that captured his imagination. Can we visit them too sometime? He asked. I want to meet the boy who wants to go to Mars. The innocent enthusiasm of his request touched both parents, reminding them that empathy and curiosity are natural human responses that don't require royal training or formal preparation. They promised to explore ways the whole family might support the hospital and the children they had met, understanding that today's experience had planted seeds for ongoing relationships rather than a single charitable gesture. After the children were settled for the night, Catherine sat at her desk in the small study that served as her private workspace. The letter she needed to write felt both urgent and delicate. Urgent because the media attention would only grow if left unaddressed, and delicate because the experience she needed to describe deserved to be honored rather than sensationalized. She began writing by hand, finding that the physical act of forming letters on paper helped her access the emotional truth of what she wanted to communicate. The first several drafts felt too formal, too distant from the reality of what had actually occurred. She discarded attempts that sounded like traditional royal statements and started over with language that felt more authentic to her personal voice. Finally, near midnight, she found words that captured both her own experience and the essence of what she had witnessed at the hospital. The letter spoke honestly about her cancer diagnosis, about the fear and uncertainty that had initially overwhelmed her, and about the unexpected strength she had discovered through connecting with others facing similar challenges. But more than that, it described the wisdom and resilience of the children and families she had met, honoring their insights while sharing her own vulnerability. She wrote about Emma's understanding that remembering meaningful moments requires intentional attention, about James's confidence that current challenges could become preparation for future adventures, about Sophia's belief that growth happens when someone cares enough to tend to you with patience, and about Marcus's recognition that adapting to unexpected circumstances actually builds strength for whatever comes next. Most importantly, she wrote about the discovery that hiding difficulty doesn't protect anyone, but sharing it with the right people at the right time can transform isolation into connection, fear into courage, and uncertainty into hope. She acknowledged that not everyone would have the opportunity for the kind of personal interaction she had experienced, but suggested that the principles underlying those connections, genuine curiosity about others' experiences, willingness to be vulnerable about our own struggles, and commitment to seeing each other as complete human beings rather than problems to be solved, could be applied in countless everyday situations. The letter concluded with an invitation rather than a statement, encouraging readers to consider how their own challenges might become sources of wisdom for others, and how their own attention and care might provide exactly what someone else needed to feel less alone in their struggles. She thanked the hospital staff, the families who had shared their stories, and the children who had taught her that courage comes in many forms, most of them quiet and many of them small. William read the letter over breakfast the next morning, his expression moving from concern to admiration as he recognized how Catherine had managed to be both personal and universal, both vulnerable and strong. The letter would be released that afternoon, accompanied by a simple statement from Kensington Palace explaining that the Princess of Wales would be beginning cancer treatment and would be stepping back from public duties temporarily to focus on her health and family. But the real story, Catherine knew, wasn't about royal protocol or media management. The real story was about the ripple effects that were already beginning to spread from a single day of genuine human connection. Sarah Mitchell had called that morning to report that Emma had slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, and that several other children on the ward were talking excitedly about sharing their own projects and insights with future visitors. Dr. Wong had mentioned that the nursing staff were discussing how to incorporate some of the day's insights into their regular therapeutic approaches, recognizing that the children's wisdom about resilience and adaptation might be valuable for other young patients facing similar challenges. The hospital was also receiving inquiries from other families who had heard informal reports about the visit and were interested in connecting with the support networks that seemed to be emerging naturally from these interactions. Most significantly, Catherine had received messages from other people facing health challenges who had somehow learned about the visit through the informal networks that exist within patient communities. Cancer centers, children's hospitals, and support groups were reporting increased interest in peer counseling programs and family support initiatives, as if word of genuine connection had sparked appetite for more of the same. The letter's publication that afternoon generated the expected media coverage, but also something unexpected. A flood of responses from ordinary people sharing their own stories of finding strength through vulnerability, of discovering wisdom in unlikely places, and of learning that isolation isn't inevitable even in the most challenging circumstances. Social media filled with stories of people reaching out to neighbors facing difficulties, of families having more honest conversations about fear and hope, and of communities organizing practical support for members dealing with health challenges. Emma's mother, Sarah, started receiving messages from parents around the world who had children facing similar medical situations. Her simple letter requesting a visit had somehow catalyzed a much broader conversation about how public figures might use their platforms to create genuine connection rather than maintain artificial distance. Other families began writing their own letters to various organizations and leaders, not requesting meetings but sharing insights about resilience, adaptation, and hope. James, the aspiring space explorer, received an email from a NASA engineer who had read about his theories and wanted to arrange a video call to discuss how medical experience might indeed inform space exploration strategies. Sophia's grandfather was contacted by a gardening organization that wanted to feature his wisdom about tending plants and people with equal attention and care. Marcus's father found himself in conversations with other parents about balancing career demands with family health crises, leading to the formation of an informal support network for working parents in similar situations. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from other children facing serious health challenges, who began creating their own maps of meaningful moments, their own theories about how current difficulties might prepare them for future adventures, and their own insights about what it means to be brave when the world feels uncertain. A quiet movement was emerging, characterized not by formal organization or publicity campaigns, but by the simple recognition that sharing authentic experience creates space for others to do the same. Catherine watched these developments unfold with amazement and humility, recognizing that her decision to be vulnerable rather than protected had somehow given others permission to do the same. The day at Manchester Children's Hospital had proven that the most powerful royal prerogative might be the courage to be genuinely human in public, to admit uncertainty rather than projecting invulnerability, and to seek wisdom from unexpected sources rather than relying solely on official expertise. 3 months later, Catherine would return to the hospital, this time bringing her own children to meet the remarkable young people who had taught her so much about courage, resilience, and hope. The visit would be private again, focused on continued relationships rather than media opportunities, guided by Emma's map of meaningful moments and James's theories about preparation and possibility. The ripples from that original quiet act of authentic connection would continue spreading far beyond anything Catherine and William could have imagined, touching lives in ways both large and small, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the simple decision to be real with each other when it matters most. The world had watched a princess become more fully human, and, in doing so, had been reminded that we all have the capacity to transform our struggles into sources of strength, our fears into foundations for courage, and our individual challenges into collective wisdom about what it means to face uncertainty with grace and hope.